I asked the question out loud, hands tucked in the sleeves of a coat that used to have buttons. The river made its winter sound against the pilings, that hollow clunk of ice meeting wood, and the wind running the length of Wacker Drive cut the question in half and carried it down to Lake Michigan like an errand it didn't understand. I didn't shout, because shouting tells people you want something. I said it the way you say good morning at a bus stop, like a courtesy you owe the weather. She was leaning on the rail, waiting on a rideshare that kept promising 2 minutes, as if time were a voucher. Gold Coast hair, the kind that's been told since childhood it has a job to do. A scarf big enough to be a room. Sneakers clean in a way that says somebody else worries about sidewalks. Her laugh, to someone on the phone, had a bell in it that even the river couldn't argue with. She hung up, saw me, and did the thing most people won't. She met my eyes. We were the only two on the Riverwalk brave or foolish enough to treat January like a stage. She didn't clutch her purse. She didn't look over my shoulder for a cop. She just looked, then tilted her head like a bird measuring a crumb. "What kind of date?" she asked. The words made a little cloud. It vanished quick, like courage in this city. "The kind a man can afford when he sleeps under Wacker," I said. "Coffee at noon. Daylight, public place. I pay." I lifted my palm and showed her the punch card from the community cafe that gives a free cup after 10 sweeps of kindness. The card had 9 stamps. "Last stamp's on me. And what's in it for me?" she said. Not mean, curious. "When you've lived long enough, you learn the difference. A story," I said, "and the chance to tell me yours without anyone tapping a watch." A black SUV ghosted up and idled, the driver eyeing us in the rear view like the city had arranged a test he didn't sign up for. She glanced at the car, then back at me. "I have a meeting," she said, voice softer, "and rules. I don't give cash. I don't fix men." "Good rules," I said. "I don't take cash before coffee, and I can't be fixed by a stranger with a scarf." She smiled at that. First crack in a face that had been trained somewhere to win rooms. "Tomorrow," she said. "Noon, the diner on Clark with the old clock. You know it?" "I know all the old clocks," I said. She got in the car, looked at me through glass that makes everyone an aquarium fish, and tapped the window twice with a fingernail as if to say, "Agreement." The SUV slid away, nose first into a crosswalk that forgives nothing. I walked back to my corner under the multi-level where the city forgets to finish its sentences. People assume sleeping rough is noise. Sirens, yelling, steel. It's mostly lists. Socks. Change of socks. Where to stash the extra pair so they stay dry. Which warming center doesn't turn you out at dawn. Which security guard hates your face less. You choose your night by your list. That night, I chose the overhang by the fire pump station because the wind had decided to bully the bridges. I lay there and counted the ribs of the steel above me like a child counts stars. When your life narrows to inches, you learn to be a poet about inches. I thought about the way she asked what kind of date, with a line in her forehead that said this wasn't her first time being asked odd favors by the city. She was rich. Everything about her said so. And yet not brittle. That combination is rarer than luck. In the morning, I went to the community cafe that gives the punch cards and swept the floor for the 10th time with the care of a man finishing a degree. "Eli," the manager said, "you don't need to do the corners twice." "I'm courting a deadline," I said. He stamped my card. "Then shave," he added. "Let the world see your neck." I used the church bathroom on Huron. The one with the paper towel dispenser that works when you talk nice to it. The mirror did what mirrors always do. Gave me the truth bare and small. 47 and freighted, the beard gone too salt, a scar on my chin from a day in '09 when scaffolding reminded me that gravity is undefeated. I cleaned up anyway. It's not vanity. It's a kind of apology to anyone who has to look at you. At noon, the diner clock had a nicotine halo around the 12, the way a saint has around his head. The waitress saw my coat and said automatically, "We got chili today, sweetheart." I nodded and asked for coffee in a clean cup. She brought both, left the bill face down like bad news, and drifted away in the rhythm of someone who has a route the way the mail does. The door jingled. The scarf entered first, then the girl inside it. Up close, the gold in her hair was a job well done, not an accident. Up close, I saw the expensive thing on her wrist wasn't a watch. It was a rubber band holding back the kind of impatience that gets people promoted. "I'm Charlotte," she said, sliding into the booth opposite without looking like she'd checked exits. "My driver thinks I've lost my mind." "I'm Eli," I said. "My driver is Gravity." She laughed. It surprised both of us. The waitress materialized with water and a look that asks, "How long?" Charlotte ordered a tuna melt, as if the word melt owed her something. "So," she said, "your story first. You asked for the date. There are stories you tell strangers like a script. Laid off in Sioux 8, wife left in 11, bottle in 12, a run of bad odds that looked from the outside like laziness. There are other stories that are too true to be schedule-friendly. That morning, I chose something in the middle, enough to be a person, not a headline. I swung a hammer most of my life, I said. Union card, good crews, winters when steel made you taste metal. When the jobs thinned, pride kept me from asking for worse ones. I got hurt. Didn't rehab right because rent wanted its share. The bottle was an understudy waiting backstage. He knew my lines. One day I put clothes in a bag for a night on a buddy's couch and the night stretched. "Family?" she asked. Not nosy, taking inventory because that's what safety does. My mother died when I was young. My brother and I took turns pretending that made us men. He took a train west and made a life I don't know how to enter. I made a life that keeps me under bridges, telling jokes to the cold. "And do you want—" She gestured, not at me, at the open door, that all conversations like this eventually point toward. "I want a room with a lock and a light switch," I said. "I want to be the kind of neighbor people ask to borrow sugar from. I want the dignity of an appointment to keep." She looked at her hands. The rubber band on her wrist snapped once, soft. "My father builds towers," she said. "The way you'd say my father hunts rain, the kind with glass that reflects the lake. He hires men like you to lift them. We live 3 miles from here and 1,000,000. "And what do you do, Charlotte?" "I go to meetings," she said. "We run a foundation with our last name in brass. We fund splashy ideas and call it impact. I post photos with captions about urgent need, and then I go home to a pantry that looks like a store. I'm very good at arranging empathy so it flatters us." The tuna melt arrived and steamed the space between us. She divided it with a knife as if giving each half a chance. She pushed a plate toward me. I put a palm up. "Coffee date," I said. We agreed. "You're making me be the one who breaks rules," she said, a little amused, a little irritated. "You're the only one qualified," I said. We ate because weather has rules, and hunger is one of them. We talked about small things with big edges, socks, and why dry is a theology, buses, and how some routes smell like a locker room for souls. The way snow makes even rich neighborhoods sound honest for 3 hours until the plows frisk them clean again. I asked if she'd ever fixed something with her hands. She said, "I once unclogged a sink and took a photo like I'd climbed Everest." I told her the trick with traps, and she put it in her phone like it might be a spell. When the plates were a memory, she set her hands flat on the table and asked the question that separates the tourists from the citizens in conversations like this. "Can I help without making a mess?" "Yes," I said, "but not today, not with cash. Give me a card for someone who knows how to turn a body into a name, into a file, into a key. Sit with me here for 5 more minutes without looking at your phone, so I can remember what it feels like to be worth someone's margin of time. And then next week, if I call, answer." She pulled a card from a slim case I could have used as a mirror. "Nadine Flores," she read off the glossy. "Street outreach, case management, knows how to find IDs when the world forgets you were born." She slid it across. "And this is mine. It rings on a desk I sometimes run from." I put both into my wallet, which was an elastic band around a handful of papers I keep dry in a Ziploc. "When I get a room," I said, "I'll make pancakes. That'll be the second date. Ambitious, she said. And if you don't call? Then our date was a story, not a plot, I said. She paid, not with cash on the table, but with a card and a tip that made the waitress look up and say, "Bless you," which is the closest Midwesterners come to confession. She left the booth with the grace of someone whose body has always been welcomed in rooms. At the door, she turned, pointed 2 fingers at her eyes, and then at me in a gesture that could have been corny and wasn't. "Answer if I answer," she said. "Deal," I said. Outside, the cold had sharpened, the kind of edge a younger man might have called bracing. I walked back toward Wacker with a card in my pocket and a sentence in my chest that felt like the first plank in a bridge. "When I get a room, I'll make pancakes." It was a child's promise, which is another way of saying it was serious. That night I slept by the pump station again, the concrete radiating the day's sun like a kindness late to the party. I dreamed of a door that didn't stick and a light I could turn off with my elbow, hands full of a skillet. In the dream, someone laughed in a kitchen, and it took me a long time, longer than it should, to realize it was me. You don't turn a man living under a bridge into a neighbor with a key, with a single phone call. That kind of magic is for cities that exist only in brochures. Chicago requires arithmetic. The math is simple and brutal. ID plus mailbox plus case manager x persistence chance. Subtract a relapse, add a bus pass. Divide by the number of offices that close for lunch just before you get there. Multiply by weather, Nadine answered. That was the first solved variable. "I remember your friend," she said to Charlotte on speaker, her voice the kind that knows how to sit with crisis without dragging it home. "I've seen him," she added, and then to me, direct. "I'm on the corner of State and Chicago tomorrow at 9. I'll bring a clipboard. You bring your real name." I brought my real name and the Ziploc with everything the river hadn't learned how to steal. We talked on a bench while commuters performed their morning theater of speed. Nadine wrote Elijah Navarro at the top of a form in block letters, because block letters are the scaffolding of new chances. She asked the questions that matter: where I slept, who knew me if I vanished, what allergies the ER should learn before the IV. She called the county for a birth certificate copy, the way seasoned hustlers order lunch, with the confidence of repetition. "Cook County Vital Records," she said into the phone. "Yes, I'm on hold. Yes, I can hum the hold music. He's standing right here. Yes, Navarro with 2 R's. 3 days later, I had a slip of paper that made me official in a way the Winters had refused me. 10 days after that, after a trip to the Secretary of State where the line moved like penance, I had a state ID with a photo of a man who looked tired and a little suspicious, the way freshly minted citizens do when presented with a camera. With ID and an outreach letter, a shelter on Damen that prides itself on teeth brushing gave me a cot. The first night I slept on sheets that smelled like detergent and God. The second night I woke at 2 expecting a siren, and heard instead the breath of men trying, in unison, not to cry. Charlotte checked in like someone learning the art of being useful without being everywhere. She did not bring bags. She did not bring speeches. She wrote, "How did the ID go?" And when I said, "I look like I owe somebody $20, she sent 6 laugh-cry faces and then, "I'm proud of you," and it landed in my chest in a place usually reserved for the first day of school. The city is a teammate when you make it easy for it. With ID, Nadine snapped open doors that had been welded shut for me, a city key card that functioned like a little passport, a P.O. box at the outreach center so a letter from a clinic had somewhere to land. Morning coffee counted as a meeting where there was always someone who knew a guy who knew a warehouse with a broom and a mop and the promise of cash tomorrow. Tomorrow came, and with it, a broom that felt right in my hands. Men who can lift steel respect mops when rent is the prize. On the 4th Tuesday of this new arithmetic, a man named Mike with a forearm tattoo of a crane that looked like it could build its own city put his hand on my shoulder and said, I could use someone who knows the difference between pine and oak. He ran a salvage yard in Pilsen that saved wood from buildings being gutted, gave it a second name, and sold it to people who wanted to remember when houses were the color of bark. "I pay light," he said, "but I pay on Fridays with the handshake that means what your father told you it meant." "My father died when I was 12, I said. "Then I'll pretend to be better than him," he said, with the kind of humor that isn't an insult because it's also a shelter. "You show up tomorrow. We'll call it a start." The salvage yard smelled like history and lemon oil. My shoulders remembered who they were when handed real weight. The first week, I swept and listened. The second week, I learned which stacks would fall if you breathed wrong. The third week, Mike handed me a palm sander and said, "Don't erase the years, just smooth the splinters." I understood. After a month, my hands stopped shaking in the morning. I told Nadine, and she wrote it down, because progress is real when it is inked. I did not call Charlotte every time something went right. That would have made the whole thing small, like I was keeping score in a game where she was the referee. I called when something changed the slope of a day, the first night in the shelter, the first paycheck that didn't bounce, the first Saturday I stood in a community center kitchen to help with breakfast instead of lining up for it. She answered more often than not, and when she couldn't, she texted a sentence that made everything make sense. "I want you to know your own strength while you're hearing mine. Pride is a ladder you can fall from." I fell on an off night in March when the wind had stripped the city bare and the yard closed early. A man I knew from an earlier chapter of my life, funny, full of shortcuts, found me behind a bodega on Taylor and said the word that used to answer all the other ones: warming. I took a sip, because old selves don't disappear. They nod from doorways. The sip became a conversation that didn't deserve to be. I woke on a bench under the L with a headache that felt like a verdict. I could have lied to Nadine and said the flu had bitten me. I didn't. She didn't congratulate me for the honesty. She said, "Okay, another first. Now own the second." She steered me to a meeting that didn't feel like a room of men telling lies to ghosts. She slid a number across a table and said, "Call if the old self comes selling something." I saved the number under later. Charlotte wrote, "Still pancakes," with a pancake emoji that looked ridiculous and holy at once. I wrote back, "Still." Duh, I was not ready to invite her to the shelter kitchen. That was my math, not hers. I told her soon, and then got to work making soon a room. It took 9 months, a baby almost. In that time, I learned the neighborhood by the way morning light fell on stoops. I learned which cops would say good evening and which ones would say move along, gents, and how to translate both without burning. I learned that the body wants order more than it wants ease. Wake, shower, socks, coffee, work. Meeting. Call my own name in a quiet place and answer it. Sleep in a bed that does not judge. By Thanksgiving of the next year, Mike said, "I got a corner. It's yours if you can make the numbers look like respect." A corner meant a workbench and permission. I dragged in cast-off doors and made tables that still had their keyholes. I called it Second Chance Woodworks, not because I thought I was the second chance, but because the wood was, and I wanted to be as humble as a plank. Charlotte came by in a coat that made the whole room warmer. She did not bring a photographer. She brought coffee and a small stack of books about women who ran factories during the war. "Perspective," she said. "Also, these smell like a school library, which is my favorite smell." She ran her fingers across a tabletop where someone had carved initials in 1974 and asked, "How much for this one?" $3.50, I said. And I said it with the poker face you wear when you name the value of something you made with your hands. "I'll pay $4, she said, "and I'll pick it up when your lease says you won't be evicted for being paid in tables." She wasn't teasing. She had done her homework. She knew the way landlords translate art into rent hearings. That night I wrote in a notebook I kept in a drawer under the socks. Not poetry, arithmetic. Corner rent, $450. Sandpaper, $40. Glue, 18s. Nails, 7s. Hours, 60, then 55, then 50, as my hands got smarter than my fear. Beneath the numbers I wrote a promise. Pancakes by Easter. It felt like a sentence I could kneel at if anyone asked. Easter came with a fog over the lake that made the skyline look like a theater set. I had a room by then, not a palace, but a rectangle with a door that unlatched from the inside, and a light switch I turned on with the back of my wrist because I refused to juggle groceries and darkness ever again. The stove had an attitude. I respected it, and it treated me like a partner. I texted Charlotte, second date, Saturday, 10, pancakes, address below, bring absolutely nothing. She wrote, understood, allergic to nothing but arrogance. When she knocked, she did it softly, like someone who knows how echoes pile up in small places. The room looked like a man had worked very hard to make it look like anything but a shelter. A chair with a back that said, stay. A plant I was trying not to kill. A photo on the wall of me holding a table with Mike, grinning behind me, like a man whose bet had paid out. The pancakes were imperfect on purpose. I wanted the story of them to be honest, not Instagram. I cooked them in a cast-iron skillet that had belonged to a woman at the shelter who told me it spoke English when it got hot. I stacked them unevenly, put butter on the top one like a crown and maple syrup that came from a bottle shaped like a story. Charlotte ate like someone who remembers school lunches more than tasting menus. Between bites, we did the small talk that matters. Rent, the bus, whether the city would ever fill the pothole at the corner that had started to collect hubcaps like museum artifacts. Here, I said when we were done, and handed her a plate with 2 extra pancakes wrapped in foil. Bribery, I said, in case anyone at the foundation asks where you were. They think I was at a breakfast meeting, she said. In a way, I was. She left a note on my table before she went, in a hand that had learned to sign checks and thank you cards early. It said, your pancakes are better than all our press releases. Keep going. C. I folded it and slid it into the Ziploc where I kept papers that reminded the world I existed. Years don't rush even when you beg them. They loaf along, then suddenly sprint. Second Chance sold enough tables to pay the rent and for me to buy a used truck with a bench seat and a radio that only played the station the previous owner had loved. The shelter asked me to speak once on a Tuesday about what Wood had taught me about the human grain. I said, don't sand the knot out, it's where the history lives. People nodded like I'd been wise. I was just telling the truth about tables. Charlotte, in her world, was changing rooms too. She left the family's public relations wing, the one with the glossy reports, and moved to the part of the foundation that required bologna sandwiches at 6 a.m. and grant audits at midnight. She returned calls. She started saying no to projects that would have won awards and yes to ones that would fail publicly before they succeeded quietly. She sent me a photo from a warming bus in January. A line of men thawing their hands in a row that looked like piano keys. We have the wrong metrics, her text read, but maybe we have the right people. There were setbacks like weather you don't put on the news, a city inspector who mistook my corner for storage and threatened me with a citation for displaying love without a permit. A guy from the old days who told a story about me on a stoop that wasn't entirely true and wasn't entirely false. A landlord who heard the word sober and assumed that meant safe now, as if human beings ever come with that guarantee. On bad days, I ate pancakes for dinner and read the note again. It did not fix me. It reminded me that I wasn't a problem set. One autumn, after a storm that shook leaves loose like deaths, the church kitchen I volunteered in caught fire. The old wiring had a memory of a different era. It failed without warning and did its worst. No one died. But a dozen programs that held the neighborhood together by the elbows suddenly had no stove. Let's fix it, I told Mike. With what? He said, both eyebrows up at once. With the same math that got us here, I said. Time, hands, calling in favors, and the one resource we never admit we have: stubbornness. We made shelves out of doors again. We made counters out of gym floors. We turned pews into benches. I called Charlotte and said, if your foundation has a petty cash line for urgent resurrection, now would be good. She laughed, then was quiet, then said, come see me Monday. I have an idea that will make my board nervous and our neighbors glad. I wore my good shirt to her office, the one with buttons that agreed to their job. The view from her conference room looked like postcards fight to be chosen for. She poured coffee and slid a draft proposal across the table. We fund capital projects that look good on brochures, she said. What if we funded one that smelled like stew? We built a kitchen, not a fancy one. One with drains that knew their role and a hood that didn't cough. I spent months inside walls no one would ever see, making sure the bones were right. The day it opened, we fed 300 bowls, and no one asked whose kindness they were eating. That's how you know you've done a thing the right way. It disappears into people's ordinary. On the way out that night, Charlotte stopped by my truck. I need a favor, she said. Name it. Teach my board to listen more than they talk, she said. I could bring in a consultant with slides, or I could bring you. Slides are cheaper, I said. Your voice is expensive in a way we need, she said. Please. I said yes, because humility is a coat you can take off if someone needs to see your shoulders most days. I spoke to a room of suits with my hands in my pockets, told them about knotholes and how you don't rip them out of wood because they tell you where the tree fought for light. I told them about socks and why they matter more than slogans. I told them about a girl with a scarf who took a chance on coffee. They didn't clap. They stood up, slow, as if their bodies had gotten heavier, and came to shake my hand one by one. It wasn't a standing ovation. It was better. It was standing. Somewhere in those years, I stopped thinking of Charlotte as the rich girl, and started thinking of her as Charlotte, who learned how to make a room safer by making it smaller. I made her pancakes every Easter I could. In return, she gave me silence when I needed it most, that quiet kind of companionship that older women in my life had once made with soup and a chair. Then came the plan that would make the future do that thing it does when wind and human intention line up. It leaned toward us briefly as if to say, all right then, show me. The building had been a night motel, you know the kind. Brick that drinks sorrow. A neon sign that flickered like a bad promise. Men in line at a window that gave them a key and kept their names. It sat on the edge of a neighborhood that loves its people enough to be angry at them when they give up. The city took it in a forfeiture and couldn't sell it because buyers with money smell ghosts. Let's buy it, I told Charlotte on a walk that October, when the trees were pretending to be expensive for a week. We who? She was smiling, but in that way that says, I will take you seriously even if you are joking, and if you are not, I will walk with you until we find the angle that makes this a thing. Second chance co-op, I said, the words feeling too big in my mouth and exactly right in the air. A worker-owned shop on the ground floor. Studios upstairs. 10 units for the guys who show up every morning even when the world forgets they exist. A kitchen that feeds sit-down meals where names are required and money is optional. A classroom for Nadine's paperwork army. A space where the door never asks, what is your business here? Because the answer is implied, living. About financing, she asked, that rubber band on her wrist now part of the muscle. A mortgage we can carry with the shop's income if we don't get cute. A city match if we hit a fundraising number, sweat equity, and every favor I've stored up in my bones since the bridge years. She didn't speak for a minute. We walked 2 blocks to give the idea a chance to either sit down or leave. Eli, she said finally, I will help, but only if the we is real. Not me writing a check so you can pretend we did it together. Not you letting us name it after the foundation so my father can put his brass where your wood should be. Deal, I said, and meant it. Meetings followed with their own rituals. Coffee you don't taste, legal pads, the way calendars fight for the right to define reality. The city said yes, then maybe, then yes again with a caveat shaped like an ordinance and a line about prevailing wage. We said yes back with a caveat shaped like dignity. The foundation board looked at models and demanded the kind of numbers that make bankers sleep. We did the math until math asked for a day off. The fundraising number was arrogant and necessary. 7 figures with 2 commas that made me swallow hard and then laugh, because the only way through a sum like that is humor and the willingness to ask strangers to believe in a room they haven't stood in yet. I spoke in churches. I spoke in union halls. I spoke in living rooms with Eames chairs where people apologized for the cat hair on their silk and then wrote checks with the kind of neatness my 3rd-grade teacher used to award stars for. Charlotte spoke too, but only as a neighbor, not a donor-in-chief. People gave, not because the brochures were beautiful, though they were, but because the idea made their ribs do that expanding thing generosity does to sternums. We hit the city's match on a Tuesday that smelled like raincoat. We were short by a sliver that felt like a canyon. Charlotte took a call in the hallway and came back with her face arranged for news that would demand composure. "We have a gap donor," she said. "Anonymous, wants only a plaque no one sees with 3 words. This saved me." "Who?" I asked. Because the human body loves a name the way the eye loves a horizon. "They don't want to be known," she said. "Do we honor that, or do we try to outsmart it?" "We honor it," I said, "and we leave a space on a wall for a name if they ever need to see themselves in daylight." The sale closed in spring. The hardest signature wasn't the mortgage. It was the deed into the co-op's name, because that was the moment we promised the building to a group of people the city doesn't trust to promise anything. Men with records, women with scar tissue, a guy who flinched at loud noises, even when a chair scraped the floor. We told the building with our hands that it belonged to them. The building believed us sooner than some of the donors did. Buildings are old-fashioned like that. Renovation isn't sexy when you do it right. It's mold abatement and subfloor. It's arguing with 1978 tile that refuses to leave without a fight. It's making a bathroom grab bar look like a design choice because you refuse to treat dignity like a hospital. It's watching the man who used to sleep under the exit sign install the new one and laugh because the word exit had never once been his friend. We named the shop The Table Next Door because that's where the real conversations happen, in diners, at the table next door, between strangers who might become neighbors if pancakes cooperate. The cafe went in beside it, not above it, because food belongs on the ground. Upstairs, the studios got windows that opened and paint that reminded you what daylight does to a room that has been told it is only allowed to be dark. Opening day came on a Saturday. The sky had ironed. We hung a ribbon across the door because ribbons are cheap metaphors that make grandmothers cry, and I wanted grandmothers to have their due. A crowd gathered that looked like the city wanted a selfie. Suits next to tattoos, high heels next to work boots, faces that carried 3 languages without granting any one of them sovereignty. I had written remarks and thrown them away twice. The board had written remarks for Charlotte, and she had folded them into a paper crane and slid it under a mug, because that is the kind of woman work made her, decorous and subversive at once. Mike was there with his crane forearm shining like fresh varnish. Nadine stood near the back, where the good volunteers always stand, ready to fill whichever gap the day opens. "Friends," I said at the mic that squealed only once, because an engineer with a soft spot had come early and walked the feedback out of the room. "I once invited a girl with a scarf to coffee while I slept under Wacker. She said yes. Today I'm inviting all of you to dinner forever." Laughter because they thought I was making a joke. I wasn't. I held up a folder. "This is the deed," I said. "It carries signatures the city requires and one the city will never put in a code book. Yours. Because we built this as a co-op. Because we insisted that keys belong in hands that have been told they don't get keys. Because we knew a table is only real if the people who set it also eat at it." I turned to Charlotte. "I asked you for a date that first day because I wanted to be seen. You turned it into an appointment the city had to keep. You taught me what my own voice sounds like when I use it in rooms I wasn't invited to. Would you come up here? She shook her head no, the way a woman does when she's burdened by attention. The crowd insisted, the way crowds do when they sense a ritual. She climbed the 3 steps and stood beside me, not behind. I put the folder on the podium and pulled out a paper I had kept folded for years, worn at the crease. This note sat under my socks, I said. It's what I read when the old math came calling. It says, "Your pancakes are better than our press releases. Keep going. See." And today I'm giving it back, framed in wood, from a door we rescued, because you need to remember what your voice did when mine couldn't. She took the frame, ran a finger along the grain like a person blessing something, and said, "I didn't save you, Eli." "I know," I said. "You answered. There's a difference." That would have been enough to make a nice ribbon cutting. It would have made the paper in the section where Civic Pride shares a page with dog rescues. But the thing that left everyone without words was not gratitude, it was governance. I lifted another document, thicker. "This is the operating agreement," I said. "We wrote it so lawyers could sleep at night. But last week the co-op members voted to add something the lawyers didn't expect, a sunset clause, on my authority. In 3 years, I step aside as director. The people who clean the bathroom, run the dishwasher, sand the tables, deliver the meals, they elect an executive team from among themselves. No founder's syndrome, no man with a story, sitting in the big chair until he dies. I am not the hero of this building. I am the first guy to leave the stage." Silence fell without a fight. The board chair's mouth made a small O, like she was remembering a lyric. Somewhere in the back, the inspector who once threatened me with a citation scribbled something that looked suspiciously like praise. Nadine wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand like a person who doesn't perform crying. "And one more thing," I said, because I had saved the part where the world tilts. When the anonymous donor filled our gap, they wrote 3 words for a plaque we promised to hide. This saved me. They have just allowed me to say today what this was. Not this building. Not this ribbon, not even this program. It was a question. What kind of date? And an answer. The kind with coffee and daylight where nobody is fixing anyone. The donor was a woman who sat at a table once and made time the currency. "Charlotte," I turned to her, "thank you for allowing me to say out loud that money didn't make this. Manners did." She shook her head again, throat tight. "Eli," she whispered into the mic without planning to, "this building saved me from the lie that charity has to be theatrical, that's all. And I brought pancakes." Laughter again, this time the relieved kind, and a cheer from Mike because he understands that jokes are scaffolding for truth. She nodded to a crew in the cafe doorway, and out came plates of pancakes, uneven on purpose, buttered like crowns, maple syrup that tasted like childhood and church basements. People took them without asking if they were gluten-free, which in our town is a sacrament. I cut the ribbon with a pair of shears older than my first mistake. The door swung open like a jaw, and the neighborhood walked in the way people do when they suspect something good but are prepared to forgive it if it fails. We served stew. We served coffee. We served the hard-earned policy that no one eats alone unless they ask to. After the ceremony, a man about my age, shirt tucked in like his mother had a say, came up slow. "I used to be one of your guys," he said, chin lifting to indicate upstairs, where relief has addresses now. "I run a cleaning crew. We got the contract for your hallways. My daughter starts at Malcolm X next fall. I didn't know where to put this gratitude, so I'll put it here." He tapped the table between us. "And come back next week with a mop." And we shook hands the way I like. One pump, workman's honest, and he moved aside because there was a line. The good kind. The kind that ends at a counter where someone asks your name before they ask your order. The kind that forms because the world found a place to do its ordinary. As the afternoon softened, I stood in the doorway and watched the street do its chores. Charlotte stood beside me, the frame under her arm like a shield she hadn't asked for. "You'll really step down?" she asked, not doubtful. just respecting the size of what I had said. If the building is what we dream, it won't need me the way it needs them, I said. I'll be around, harassing the dishwasher for fun and teaching a class on the theology of socks. She laughed. Then she did a small thing that felt like a benediction. She reached out, took my hand, not tugging, not clasping, just a touch long enough to be familial. For the record, she said, the first date was for you. The second date, from pancakes until now, was for me. We didn't need to say more. The river would carry the rest, as it always does, under Wacker, where the old life used to be, and past the pilings, where ice still performs its winter percussion. The city kept moving. The building breathed. Somewhere upstairs, a light switch clicked, and a man who had learned to count inches turned off the day with the back of his wrist, hands full of tomorrow.